Have you ever witnessed retribution catch up to someone? It's incredibly gratifying. I won't reveal too much, but once you hear today's account, you'll understand why I brought it up. In my Minecraft realm today, we'll be engaging in more construction. I've discovered a compelling narrative to share, so let's dive right in. The story originates from the subreddit r/nosleep, courtesy of user Bad Andy the Red. My companion and I were tasked with a perilous job, cleaning peculiar graffiti from an abandoned structure. We narrowly escaped with our lives. Another day, another assignment. It would be a welcome change to find a more stable occupation someday, ideally with benefits like paid time off and a low fatality rate. Instead, Jake and I have explored so many professions that I've lost count. We've been crime scene cleaners, construction laborers, barkeeps, and even, for a brief stint, amateur exorcists. Please refrain from inquiring about that particular endeavor, though I will say the papacy might overlook our transgressions if they witnessed our effectiveness. Nevertheless, Jake and I found ourselves in need of income once more. Our most recent engagement concluded swiftly and was, by our usual standards, quite peculiar. It involved another cleaning task, and we presumed that despite the unusual description and the undeniably unsettling location of a derelict building on the outskirts of town, it would be manageable. At the very least, we hoped to avoid dealing with bodily fluids and deceased individuals, and perhaps there wouldn't be any sinister dolls lurking in the basement. This occurred approximately 1 month ago. While searching for opportunities, we stumbled upon a curious advertisement seeking a cleaning crew for an old market hall near the city center. It simply involved some repainting. Given our prior experiences, it seemed like a straightforward task, especially considering the surprisingly lucrative compensation for such a simple job. We eagerly accepted the offer, as it promised our first substantial income in quite some time. Jake and I drove the van to the property to meet our contact. Jake was beaming, as was his custom when embarking on a new venture. I suspected he derived a certain masochistic pleasure from the prospect of our surroundings devolving into chaos, as if under a curse. I was simply looking forward to another paycheck, even if it was another cleaning job, I remarked. Come on, man. I'm sure this one will be legitimate, Jake attempted to reassure me, while his fingers frantically shuffled through his music selection. He eventually settled on Metallica's Battery. Before he amplified the volume, he added, "After all, what's the worst that could happen? Don't finish that sentence," I retorted. He simply shrugged and drowned out my apprehension with the music. We continued our journey, observing the unmistakable signs of decay in the surrounding buildings, confirming our approach. Jake reconfirmed the navigation. "This is it up ahead. The old Mayhew's flea market. I'm surprised this place shut down. Who could resist such incredible wares?" He quipped sarcastically, gesturing towards a weathered sign depicting a rather unpleasant-looking man in an ill-fitting suit. Jake had a valid point. The marketing was as dismal as the location. We parked in a lot adjacent to the condemned edifice. Now that we were closer, I realized the structure was quite extensive, which made sense if it had once been a thriving marketplace. However, the entire building was in a state of severe disrepair. Many windows were shattered, crude wooden planks were haphazardly affixed to sections, and the entire structure appeared as though a gentle gust of wind could topple it. As I surveyed the scene, I noticed that virtually every visible surface was defaced with tags or covered in graffiti. There was also a peculiar ring of what appeared to be white paint on the ground, encircling the perimeter. I pondered why anyone would commission us to clean this place rather than simply demolishing it and constructing something superior, but I supposed it was irrelevant. We were present and prepared to commence work. Assuming this job was genuinely legitimate, I was eager to begin immediately. Within a few minutes, another vehicle arrived. It was a well-maintained, albeit somewhat dated Oldsmobile, still possessing a certain charm despite its better days being long past. A tall gentleman sporting a cowboy hat emerged from the car and approached us. "Howdy, boys. The name's Earl Mayhew. Good to meet you." Jake stepped forward, promptly extending his hand and offering a sarcastic, "Howdy, Earl. Name's Jake, and this here's my friend." I winced at Jake's exaggerated accent and hoped it wouldn't offend our new employer. Instead, Mr. Mayhew chuckled and slapped his thigh. I extended my hand, but before I could speak, Mr. Mayhew bypassed me and headed towards the building. Well then, now that the introductions are concluded, please follow me. I can provide you with a tour of the premises, and you fellas can then decide if you're interested in the position. He proceeded towards the building, and we exchanged a glance before following. Mayhew fumbled in his pocket for a moment, then produced a key and unlocked a substantial padlock on the main entrance. Before entering, he peered inside, scanning the surroundings as if anticipating something. He then stepped in and motioned for us to follow. I know she doesn't look like much these days, but we had some wonderful times here. I simply can't bring myself to sell the place. This was once one of the most prosperous flea markets in the entire county. We attracted visitors from across the state, with hundreds of vendors and patrons, but that was a bygone era. Mayhew sighed wistfully, appearing momentarily lost in thought. He quickly refocused regarding us. Apologies, gentlemen. So many cherished memories. Anyway, come this way and I'll show you the primary tasks I require. We followed him down a dimly lit corridor into a spacious central area littered with debris. Nearly every surface was adorned with some form of graffiti. Definitely a fixer-upper, Jake muttered. Mayhew's eyes narrowed, evidently having overheard him. Jake quickly recovered, apologizing, but it has excellent structural integrity, a lot of character. It's no wonder you wish to preserve it. Mayhew nodded and continued onward. Jake offered me a subdued thumbs up, and I rolled my eyes. We stopped again, and Mayhew began examining specific walls and sections of the floor with meticulous attention. Just as I was about to inquire about his focus, he raised a hand and pointed to a spot on the wall. There, precisely there. That is what I need you gentlemen to address. I looked at the peculiar markings on the wall, feeling utterly perplexed. What is that? I inquired, unable to mask my confusion. That is what you will need to clean. Believe it or not, this place has undergone recent renovations. I even have a crew working on site at night. No matter how much we conceal it, it reappears. I need you two to cover it up before... He paused, appearing uneasy. Before what? Jake inquired. Before it transforms, Mayhew concluded. We exchanged incredulous glances. Transforms? I sought clarification. Yes, I realize it sounds outlandish, but this artistic expression, if you can call it that, can indeed change. Propagates constantly, gradually, and persistently. If it's not addressed promptly, it will eventually alter its appearance. He paused, his expression suggesting he was suppressing an involuntary tremor. Well, it's best to prevent it from reaching that stage. We've encountered some unfortunate incidents in the past when it did. I disliked the way he uttered the word incident. However, it won't be a problem if you are diligent. I merely require you gentlemen to handle the paint. It must be a paint that effectively conceals it, not some inferior product. It seems that as long as we utilize quality materials, it delays its recurrence. We attempted using paint thinner in an effort to expedite its dissipation. Regrettably, it proved ineffective in halting its spread. Consequently, I was left with numerous gallons of the substance that I had to store in the main hall. Once I secure the necessary funds, I intend to re-wallpaper this entire establishment and replace all the flooring, and then we'll see how that thing reacts. He slapped his knee and chuckled again, but then abruptly stopped to clear his throat awkwardly. I was bewildered. What was this thing he was referring to? It felt as though he was withholding crucial information. Mayhew adjusted his jacket and continued. So, gentlemen, what do you say? A mere few weeks of painting, and I'm prepared to compensate you the full salary of the previous 5-person crew. He extended a piece of paper, which I took before Jake could. He glanced over my shoulder and let out a soft whoa upon seeing the offered payment. I struggled to contain my own excitement. It was double our earnings from our last job, for only a couple of weeks of work. Count us in, sir, we said almost simultaneously. Excellent, boys. Pleased to be doing business with you. You can commence tomorrow. I simply need to finalize a few arrangements with the other crew, and you'll be ready to go. Arrive bright and early tomorrow, say around 6 a.m., and we can discuss the specifics." We arrived punctually the following morning as requested. I was still feeling groggy and quickly downed an energy drink before exiting the van. Jake, however, seemed unusually invigorated, leaping out as soon as we arrived, nearly stumbling in his haste. Mr. Mayhew was already there, awaiting our arrival. He appeared troubled by something, kneeling with a measuring tape and shaking his head. There was a peculiar patch of what looked like dark paint on the ground near the white ring. As we approached, I heard him muttering in frustration about an artistic endeavor. I cleared my throat to get his attention and called out, "Hey, Mr. Mayhew, good morning." He looked up, his expression of concern vanishing, replaced by his practiced business smile. "Hey boys, thanks for coming. All right, let's get down to business. I'm going to go over a few things, so please hold your questions until the end. I need y'all to listen and remember these instructions." We both readily agreed, and Mayhew continued. "You'll be dedicating most of your shift to painting, but not just any ordinary painting. Try to think of it as a moving target. To provide some context for our situation, a long time ago we had a vendor here. She claimed to be an artist, but in reality, she was more of a sorceress. I know it sounds far-fetched, but it's the absolute truth. She caused a great deal of trouble. Eventually, she placed a curse on this entire place when circumstances changed in a manner she disliked. At some point, she vanished. Ever since then, this paint has a way of appearing on the walls, the ceilings, even the floors." He gestured around, and I then noticed the outlines of 3 human faces staring down at us from the ceiling. They lacked discernible features, but their absence of eyes and mouths made them even more unnerving. "Like those." I pointed upwards, and Mayhew exclaimed, "Oh, for Christ's sake. Yes, precisely like that. Let's step outside for now, fellas." We followed him as he hastily exited. A look of genuine fear etched on his face as we retreated. We moved out into the parking lot, and he let out a gasping sigh. "My apologies. It just startled me. Anyway, this artist has been creating these paintings, and I've had people covering them up daily. They simply keep reappearing. For a while, I decided to let it be, but then unfortunate events began to occur. Vendors started to depart, deeming the place unsafe. He spat on the ground and grimaced. Then, people began experiencing hallucinations and sustaining injuries. Finally, an incident occurred that led to the closure of the market. Since then, I've held on to the hope that something can be done to salvage the property, but I can't simply abandon it. That entity, it's not content to remain confined here. Each day, the artwork encroaches a little closer to the exterior, and the details become slightly more defined. When those details become clear, if you perceive them, well, something terrible transpires. Something that is best left concealed. That's why I require you boys and the other cleaners." He cleared his throat, appearing troubled. I was trying to process the bizarre narrative, and so was Jake. Mayhew reasserted his confidence and continued. "Whatever this substance is, it is hazardous. As detrimental as black mold and just as pervasive, paint over any and all of it that you observe. Just ensure it doesn't spread beyond this perimeter. Address that mess first." He pointed to a line on the lot snaking away from the building. "And the most critical instruction, if you notice any faces or outlines, similar to what we saw in that room, cover them immediately. Do not delay. If they begin to form or worse, the mouths." He paused again, suppressing a shudder. "Well, just cover them up and disregard any external influences, except for each other and me. Otherwise, it's as simple as pie, correct? You guys are capable of this. And if the work appears satisfactory after the first day, you might even receive a bonus. However, I do require you to sign this contract. I'd like to offer my employees genuine employment." He held out some papers and Jake scoffed. "We are independent contractors, first and foremost." The indignation in his voice surprised me, and for a moment, I thought it might actually be a deal breaker. Then Jake chuckled as Mayhew looked dumbfounded. "Just pulling your leg. Yeah, bring on the paperwork. Do we get health care? Mayhew smiled again and joined in the laughter. Fill out the paperwork, and you'll be eligible for health coverage and life insurance. Mayhew directed us to a small picnic table set up just outside the building, and we completed the necessary forms. I noticed something peculiar in the life insurance policy. It indicated that the designated beneficiary was Mayhew Industries. It seemed rather unusual, so I inquired about it. Mr. Mayhew, this document states that the company is initially the beneficiary of our life insurance policy. When does that designation change? Oh, that, he replied dismissively. It's just a standard procedure. For the first 2 weeks, we hold the account in trust until it's transferred to your designated beneficiary. It felt odd, and I was about to advise Jake to reconsider, but I glanced over and saw he had finished and was already handing his completed papers back to Mr. Mayhew. I sighed and then signed my own. After all, how detrimental could a painting job truly be? Once everything was finalized, Mr. Mayhew escorted us to a small storage shed filled with dozens, if not hundreds, of cans of white paint. There were also rollers, trays, brushes, everything a painter might require. This should suffice to get you started. Use as much as you need. Thicker coats seem to delay that infernal substance's reappearance. Have fun, you two, and be careful. I'd hate to lose you as well. A side note, folks, when he said lose you too, he didn't mean like losing 2 individuals. He meant he'd hate to lose you as in he'd also regret your departure. Man, geez. All right, let's continue reading. He walked towards his car, moving in an unusual gait, as if deliberately avoiding the path we had taken to arrive. I noticed that the line of paint we had observed earlier was gone, or rather, it had curved in a new direction, oddly pointing towards Mr. Mayhew's departure route. I dismissed the unsettling sight and asked Jake, should we be concerned about that last remark about losing us too? He shrugged. I don't know, but what I do know is I'm not touching that creepy face ceiling paint. I'm calling it. He nearly doubled over with laughter, and I covered my face with my hands. I already had a premonition that this would be as engaging as watching paint dry. We commenced our work promptly. All the necessary supplies were conveniently located. It wasn't long before we had covered the oddly serpentine trail of dark paint that had been seeping from the building with the white camouflage. Not sure what that guy was talking about. This is going great. It's not like this stuff is actively moving. Come on, let's head inside and tackle the other rooms. Jake was right. Since Mr. Mayhew wasn't concerned with our level of meticulousness, the progress was swift and efficient. We opened the main entrance and nearly recoiled in unison. There, within the entryway, which had been a faded white just an hour prior, were now intricate murals depicting dozens of people and numerous vacant faces rendered in that streaking black paint. All of them seemed to stare at us from the walls, the ceiling, and even the floor. Okay, so that's not ideal, I mumbled, observing the impossible transformation. The fresh paint glistened and possessed an unsettling luminescence, as if it had ceased its movement only because we had arrived to witness it. Well, shoot, Jake exclaimed. There's always something, though. At least the old man was honest with us. It seems we just need to cover this stuff up, or at least do as much as we can, so let's get to it. Suddenly, he surged forward, paint roller in hand, and swept it across the surface of one of the newly appeared paintings. I couldn't be entirely certain, but I thought I sensed a disquieting increase in pressure as he covered the area where the eyes and facial features of one of the figures had been. I was disturbed, but in that moment, I managed to muster the same resolve Jake displayed. We were here. We had encountered peculiar situations before, and we desperately needed the funds. I took a deep breath, opened a fresh can of paint, and began my work. At the pace we were proceeding, we could accomplish a significant amount by evening and secure that bonus. But we were profoundly mistaken. Nearly 10 hours had elapsed, and only a single room appeared to be completed. Jake and I were hesitant to leave the room unattended, as we both harbored the suspicion that the moment we did, the insidious black paint would surge back in to negate all our efforts. This is unbelievable, man. What in the world is happening? Some kind of haunting meant to devalue this guy's resale potential. I mean, at least it's not attacking us, but it just keeps undoing our damn work. Jake shouted at the wall, kicking a can of paint towards the corner he had just finished painting. It was already beginning to show new black streaks beneath the surface. I know this feels futile, but we're getting paid by the hour, so even without a bonus, the pay is still good. Come on, I think the evening shift should be arriving soon, I said, attempting to offer reassurance. We left our supplies in the hallway and walked out to the parking lot. As we neared the exit, we heard a voice call out from outside. "Nathan, where are you? You need to get out of there. It's not safe." Jake and I exchanged confused glances. We exited the building and saw a truck parked next to our van, with a man shouting at the building but refraining from crossing the painted perimeter. "Hey, there's no Nathan here, but are you part of the evening crew here to take over?" I inquired. He appeared taken aback by my assertion, his expression shifting from confusion to horror. "No, oh no, no, he brought other people here. Oh God, please tell me you saw Nathan inside. We need to get him out. He's been in there since last night." "Whoa, slow down, dude," Jake said, attempting to calm the visibly panicked man. "We've been painting here all day, and your friend isn't inside. We would have seen him. Who are you, and what's going on?" Mayhew mentioned that a night shift would be arriving to take over. The man took a deep breath and spoke in a peculiar whisper. "My name is Roger. Nathan is my friend and fellow painter. We were hired by Mr. Mayhew to paint over the peculiar artwork in this building. That's what we were doing until something occurred last night. Nathan didn't make it out. Something happened, and I can't quite recall." He looked confused, then frightened again as he struggled to remember. "I don't know what happened. When I awoke, I was back home. I tried to call Nathan, but he didn't respond. Then, fragmented memories began to surface. Flashing images, faces, and Nathan staring intently at a wall, his eyes appearing disoriented. I have no idea what is transpiring, but we must locate him immediately." Before we could ask him any further questions, Roger, momentarily forgetting his apprehension about the paint perimeter, bolted past us, shouting for his friend. "Shall we?" Jake inquired with a smile and then sprinted after the screaming painter, back into the purportedly haunted building in search of his friend. I groaned and then followed him. As soon as we entered the structure, something felt amiss. The aroma of fresh paint was more potent, yet it was accompanied by a peculiar acrid undertone, as if something else permeated the air. I observed with disturbed fascination the areas we had just painted over, noticing the black, tar-like fluid oozing down the walls. Jake disregarded the unsettling sight and hurried ahead, attempting to catch up with Roger. I rounded a corner, but Roger was nowhere in sight. Suddenly, the building's walls began to tremble, and we scrambled back toward the main entrance, fearing a structural collapse. After a tense moment, I looked at the door. A sinuous line of paint was oozing from the floor, coalescing into an inky black expanse that had obliterated most of the door's features. Seeing the paint move was significantly more disturbing. It resembled a living entity, and watching it induced a severe headache. Jake was also staring at it, perhaps a little too intently. I nudged his shoulder. He blinked and shook off the effect. "Let's prop the door open," I suggested, disinclined to remain trapped with the forming image. I grabbed the handles, but the door wouldn't budge. A sickening squelch emanated, and I was thrown backward, gasping as a vivid, lifelike portrait of a face opened its eyes and regarded me from where the plain door had been. I was aghast yet strangely captivated by the shifting patterns within the visages. I knew I shouldn't stare, but how could I avert my gaze from such a marvel? I leaned closer, needing to see more. Abruptly, a hand landed on my shoulder, and I was yanked backward, hitting the ground hard and snapping out of my stupor. "None of that possession nonsense, man. Don't look at it. Come on, let's try a window or something. This place is a wreck, and whatever's going on, I don't want to be stuck here," Jake whispered. I staggered to my feet, shaking my head. I nearly looked back at the undulating face on the door, and I felt an invisible force reaching for my mind. I shuddered and recoiled. We found a window, but the view beyond was pitch black, hinting at something ominous. Suddenly, Jake was beside me, wielding a brick he'd evidently scavenged. "Here's hoping," he muttered, preparing to hurl it. I was relieved by the satisfying shatter of glass, but horrified when, instead of daylight, waves of black paint began to pour from the opening. "Are you serious?" Jake exclaimed in disbelief. "Come on, let's get away from this one. Maybe if we find those other guys, they can explain what's happening and how we can escape," I said, moving away. Eventually, we heard a noise emanating from the west wing and followed the dim corridors towards it. It sounded like muffled cries of pain. As we entered the room, we witnessed a ghastly scene. Roger lay sprawled on the floor, brutally wounded. His body was posed like a macabre sculpture, with a gaping wound in his torso that suggested he had been nearly disemboweled. Horrifically, he appeared to be alive. We approached cautiously, and he let out a weak groan of agony. "Good heavens, what happened here?" Jake managed to stammer, and I echoed his sentiment. As we drew nearer, Roger's eyes finally rolled forward from the back of his head to face us. He moaned and mumbled, clearly attempting to speak. "Go. Not safe. Nathan is here, but something else." He fell silent, but his eyes remained open. He was deceased. "Oh man, what happened to him?" Jake asked, panicked. I had no clue and was struggling to process what we had just witnessed. We scanned the room in paranoid confusion when we heard a sound that terrified us more than the silence. Footsteps. "Did you bring the insurance?" I whispered to Jake, my voice trembling. A long pause ensued as I met his gaze, my heart sinking. "Yeah, it's just in the van," he replied, forcing a strained smile. "Of course," I groaned, uncertain if a firearm, our insurance, would be effective against sentient paint and whatever else lurked within the building. "Well, come on then. We can't just stay here. Let's try to find a way out." Jake nodded, and together we crept from the room, leaving Roger's bloodied form behind. We found another window, and seeing no monstrous visages lurking beyond, I felt a flicker of hope. I found a large piece of rebar nearby and hefted it. "Nice, man. Let's give it a shot." "Crack it open," Jake whispered. I grasped the bar and swung with all my might. Glass shattered, and the darkness beyond gave way to the muted glow of twilight. This was our escape route. I used the rebar to clear the frame of shards. It was a tight squeeze, but I figured we could both get out of the building and this vicinity before contacting Mayhew with the grim news. Just as the path was clear and I was pulling myself through the opening, I heard footsteps again. I glanced down the hall and saw a figure emerging from an adjacent room. A low, creaking sound, like a rusty door hinge, echoed as the figure moved with apparent pain. "Move! Move! Move!" Jake yelled at me, and I hauled myself up just in time to be met by a wall of dark faces. I sat there, straddling the windowsill, staring in disbelief and horror as the tormented visages of dozens of people gazed back at me. "All is one," they wailed, a cacophony of suffering that nearly ruptured my eardrums. I tumbled off the windowsill, landing hard, but the physical pain was secondary to the agony in my ears. The awful cries of those monstrous half-faces stunned me. I stared blankly at the broken window, half expecting them to vanish. But the leering faces looked down, and I could swear they began to laugh. Before I knew what was happening, I heard Jake's shouts and felt him hauling me back to my feet. "Come on, man. Come on." He pulled me up, and we sprinted away from the wall of faces. Glancing back, I saw the figure slowly advancing, faint tendrils of inky blackness trailing behind it, coating the walls, floor, and ceiling with more of the dreadful paint. We rushed onward, but our path led to a large double door, secured with a padlock and bars. "Now what?" Jake stammered, as scared and desperate as I felt. My mind was clearing, and I noticed we had passed 2 doors during our flight. "This way," I told him as we reluctantly retreated towards our pursuer. We ducked into one of the rooms and shut the door just as the dreadful creaking and groaning grew closer. The room was small, containing old filing cabinets and 2 dilapidated desks. We took cover beneath one, trying to suppress our ragged breaths as we waited to see if the entity would follow. For several minutes, we huddled in panicked anticipation. As we waited, I spotted something in a half-open drawer, a small silver locket. I reached for it, making a slight noise that nearly sent Jake into a frenzy. I offered an apologetic shrug and retrieved the locket. Inside were portraits of two young women. Turning it over, I saw an inscription. To Lily, my sister and my muse. Love, Sam. What's that? Jake asked. I'm not sure where it came from, but something about the face in this locket feels strangely familiar. Jake frowned. All right, man. Just don't put it on or get possessed by some ghost girl. I'm not dealing with that tonight. I agreed, almost laughing at the absurdity of our predicament. For a moment, I thought we might have escaped our pursuer. I was about to stand up when the doorknob rattled. The door creaked open ominously, and we both knew it was inside. The scent of old paper was replaced by the sickly sweet aroma of decay, followed closely by the pungent fumes of fresh paint. I couldn't bring myself to look over the desk. It was in here. Jake sat beside me, shivering, but striving for silence. His eyes suddenly widened, and I stole a glance at his focus. A writhing tendril of paint snaking past our hiding spot and slowly ascending the adjacent wall. We heard shambling footsteps and a terrible gasping sound, like someone struggling for breath. Eventually, the paint on the wall began to coalesce, forming the silhouette of a face. Jake shook his head and closed his eyes. I knew we shouldn't look, but if we remained still, we would have no choice. An idea struck me. It was a terrible idea, but we were in dire straits. As the face began to form, I knew it would spot us. So, I lunged forward, positioning myself with my back to the face, attempting to shield its vision. My plan faltered as I tripped, knocking over a small stack of papers. I held my breath, but the footsteps drew nearer. I knew the entity was too close. I had to act. I jumped up and yelled, "Nathan, wait!" The figure stopped, its gaze fixed on me. In the dim light, I finally saw its features. It took all my willpower to meet its stare. It was a middle-aged man, bald with a thin beard. His eye color was indiscernible, only fathomless black pits of swirling ink, mirroring the sentient paint we had been trying to evade. Whatever was afflicting this place seemed to have possessed one of the cleaners, and I had no idea what I was truly confronting. A dreadful pause hung in the air. I feared I had made a mistake. I anticipated it would rush us, engulfing Jake and me in that dreadful paint. Instead, I heard a choking, gasping sound, followed by the figure hunching over and retching. In the next moment, torrents of writhing paint spewed from its body. Then, the entity that had been Nathan looked at me again, cleared its throat and spoke. "You too, more people mayhem brought to destroy my work. You cannot be allowed to live. You cannot be allowed to do this." The figure lurched forward, and I raised my hands. Wait. We were just hired to clean the place." The entity extended its arms, and serpentine strands of paint unfurled. I thought we were doomed, but I reached for the trinket I had just found and held it out. "Wait, was this you? Please tell us. Who are we truly speaking to?" The entity stared at me for another moment, then at Jake, who had silently risen to observe. "Where did you find that?" it rasped. Curiously, the entity's voice softened upon seeing the locket. "Yes, my name was Samantha Gardner. I used to work here selling paintings that my sister Lily and I would create. People adored our work, and for a long time this was a place of joy. Then that lecherous bastard Mayhew bought it and began extorting all the vendors. He started arbitrarily increasing our rent, forcing out vendors who had been here for years simply because they wouldn't appease him. Worst of all was his treatment of the female vendors. The grotesque face of the Nathan puppet contorted, and I heard bones crack as a fist clenched. I shivered, contemplating the entity's rage. After a time, enough of us banded together to try and oust him, but he escalated things. He knew I wouldn't let it go. He invited me here to discuss it and attempt an arrangement. Then he killed me. My sister was horrified. She tried to involve the police, but they couldn't prove anything. Mayhew ensured it all appeared accidental. I thought it was over. I was dead. but somehow Lily used her paints to revive me. I don't know how it worked or how I'm back, but what I do know is I will get that bastard for what he did to all of us. Hey, ghost man or lady, we only took this as a temp job, Jake interjected. Mayhew sucks as far as we're concerned. He didn't tell us any of this. So, do you think if you let us go, we could, I don't know, maybe rough him up for you or something? No need to hurt us, right? Jake asked. The figure paused as if considering. A brief flicker of hope ignited, but my heart sank as the figure shook its head. Listen, you got to respect Jake for trying. That's actually hilarious. No, I'm sorry. You're too valuable to me as vessels. The others couldn't leave. This one is too broken. I don't need to trust someone who works for Mayhew when I can just wear them. Don't move. It's less painful if you don't resist. The creature staggered towards us again, arms outstretched, terrible paint bleeding from its mouth. I pulled Jake away as a jet of black paint sprayed out and nearly engulfed him. We recovered quickly and burst from the room, fleeing as fast as we could. As we fled, I observed that the walls were coated in more of the paint, dripping from the ceiling like blood from a wound. We raced back through the main hall and encountered a horrifying spectacle. The walls were adorned with more of the black paint. On every surface, the faces of the deceased writhed in various stages of decay. The sentient paint surged and writhed over everything, a canvas of lost souls. We had to escape, knowing that entity was still in pursuit. I had another idea. It was a reckless one, but we had few options. Jake, do you have your lighter? I asked him. Yeah, man. Why? What's the plan? He handed it to me. I contemplated the sheer lunacy of the idea, but resolved to proceed when I considered the potential consequences of inaction. Well, if this is one giant painting and the canvas is trapping us, why not burn our way out? We have gallons of paint thinner in the hall that Mayhew left, and a light source. I trailed off. Jake's look of concern morphed into a manic, hopeful grin. It's crazy, dangerous, and stupid. I love it. Let's go. We sprinted back to the main entrance, ignoring the horrific wails emanating from the images surrounding us. Reaching the front door, we saw the drums of paint thinner nearby. Throw some, I instructed Jake. He doused the door with paint thinner, splashing it everywhere as he kept his eyes shut, unwilling to look at the horrific faces screaming back at him. Back up, I shouted to him. He stumbled back a few steps. I opened the lighter, struck a flame, and crossed my fingers. I threw the lighter, and after a moment, a burst of light erupted as a small fireball ignited. The stench of burning paint and charred wood was atrocious. The faces melted away, then the paint, then parts of the door as the fire rapidly spread from surface to surface. Now we just have to get out of this burning building. I laughed as we watched the smoldering door. Suddenly, a terrible wail echoed through the hall, and we saw the contorted form of Nathan being borne aloft by a small wave of living paint. The puppet-like entity spoke in the enraged voice of the slain painter. You pathetic, monstrous savages. What have you done? My work, my life, you will burn it all down. There will be no justice for us all. No future, no more art. I almost felt a pang of sympathy for the rambling specter until its horrific face contorted into a mask of pure hatred, and the entity shrieked and charged at us. We had to go. I looked at Jake and he nodded. We both leapt at the burning door, feet outstretched in a synchronized kick. The door burst open, and we tumbled out into the cold night air. We gasped for fresh air and scrambled away from the blazing building. The paint monster continued wailing but could not follow us through the inferno. As we watched it burn, we saw the outermost tendrils of paint begin to wither and dissipate, despite not being touched by the flames. Should we call 911? Jake asked. I considered it for a moment, then heard the shrieks from within. Nah, let it burn for a bit. We sat and watched the conflagration for a while before hearing a car approaching. It was Mr. Mayhew. He jumped out of his car, his face pale. No, my building. What happened? He stomped towards us angrily. Jake looked ready to confront him, but I held up a hand to stop him and spoke first. So, I think a few details were omitted about this project. But I'm guessing we weren't supposed to find out before we got turned into demonic meat puppets by the ghost of an artist you murdered. Mayhew looked stunned that I had vocalized it. I pressed my assertion. And you thought we would die in there like the others? What was the insurance policy you had for Roger and Nathan? Was it substantial? How much was ours? Hopefully, it was comparable to whatever you'll receive for this place burning down. I flashed a sarcastic smile, and he fumed. Mayhew looked indignant and began to respond. No, it's not like that. The job needed to be done to keep me. He stopped and corrected himself. To keep the business safe. The money just helped cover the expenses. It's not my fault they couldn't listen and stay safe. At that point, Jake had had enough. Just as Mayhew was looking smugly superior, Jake punched him hard in the face. The large man staggered and fell. Jake was about to follow up, but I held him back when I saw Mayhew draw a gun on us. He looked up at Jake with a bloody nose and hatred burning in his eyes. I ought to kill you for that, but first responders are probably on the way, and it wouldn't look good for the public. Plus, I think the fire may have contained it. I never thought to try before since I couldn't be sure. Didn't want to let it out, but I think it's gone. He looked around and smiled. So, I'll let y'all leave, but if you so much as say anything about this, I swear. We won't, I interjected, pulling Jake away from lunging at Mayhew again. Go to hell, you greedy son of a... I pulled Jake away and took a few steps back from Mayhew, who huffed and put his gun away. He mumbled something about lawyers and got back in his car. Are we just going to let this murderer get away like that? Jake asked indignantly. I felt an odd tingling in my pocket and removed the silver locket. I looked at it and smiled. No, it's fine. He can leave, but he won't be escaping justice this time. Jake looked confused as I bent down to retrieve a small scrap of paper lying by his feet. I wrapped the paper around the locket, feeling a disturbing sense of energy. I broke into a run and moved swiftly to the side as Mayhew's Oldsmobile was departing. I slipped the small fragment of paper into the seam of his trunk just before the car sped off. Jake ran up, looking perplexed. What was that? He asked. I held up a hand and pointed to Mayhew as he drove away. I watched with a smile as lines of black paint began to emerge from his trunk. Jake saw it too, his eyes widening. Wow, man, that's going to be a fun reunion. I nodded silently. Jake and I waited for a bit, then turned back towards the van as we heard a crashing sound in the distance, followed by gunshots and a scream. Do you think we could get proper jobs as painters just to try it out? Jake shrugged and chuckled. Nah, something else next. Painting sucks. I think this is the first time on the channel that I've read a story that was funny but terrifying at the same time. As I'm reading this story, I just see Shaggy and Scooby-Doo. So yeah, the cowboy businessman guy ended up being very untrustworthy, as he sent these guys to literally just be killed and used as meat puppets by a murdered lady that he murdered. And yeah, he killed the lady and started upcharging all these vendors at this flea market. Anyway, huge shout out to Bad Andy the Red. I hope you guys enjoyed that story as much as I did. Also, huge shout out to my channel members. Thank you so much for your support on the channel. If you guys do want to further support the channel, that link's going to be down in the description. However, it is not at all required. This is something you should only undertake if it's genuinely your desire. Additionally, remember to visit the Discord community. It's populated by a fantastic group of individuals, and they organize events for everyone on a weekly basis. If you found today's presentation enjoyable, please consider giving it a thumbs up and subscribing. Your support is incredibly valuable. And if this particular video wasn't to your taste, I hope you'll find tomorrow's content more to your liking, as new uploads are published each and every day. I appreciate you taking the time to watch. Farewell.